When my husband died, I thought I had hit the bottom of grief. But it turned out the real tragedy was only just beginning. The night after the funeral, my daughter-in-law casually threw my 3 suitcases down into the garage and said coldly, "From now on, you sleep with the dog." I did not respond. I just nodded and smiled. She had no idea that behind my silence was a much bigger secret: $20 million and an oceanfront mansion my husband had left behind. That night, in the damp cold of the garage, amid the smell of gasoline and the heavy scent of earth, I swore I would rewrite the rules of the game, not with shouting, but with the composure of a widow who had loved deeply and endured enough to understand what real power is. If you are still listening up to this point, let me know where you are watching from. Every comment you leave is a footprint on this journey. And if this story touches you even a little, do not forget to hit like so it can spread further. My name is Cynthia Brewer, 60 years old, and just that very morning, I had buried the man who had been my husband for 42 years, Robert Brewer. Light drizzle fell over Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland. Each cold, steel-like drop hit the damp ground. Black umbrellas formed a circle around the flag-draped casket, while the sound of an organ floated from somewhere, distant yet aching. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, wet earth, and tears. I stood there, clutching my shawl tightly, trying to keep my balance between the pain and a strange emptiness opening up inside me. People often say that after death, only love remains. But that day, I realized it is not only love that survives. Ambition and hypocrisy do too. My son, Malik, sat in the front row. His eyes were red and swollen. His head was bowed low, his hands clenched so tightly they had turned white. I knew he was trying not to break down in front of everyone. My daughter-in-law, Danielle, was the complete opposite. She did not cry, she did not tremble, not a single sign of someone grieving. Her hand rested lightly on Malik's shoulder, but her eyes flicked around, sweeping over each face, each guest, as if she were sorting them: who was useful, who was profitable, who needed to be flattered. When I caught that look, a shiver ran down my spine. I knew immediately, this was not grief. This was the beginning of a plan. When the pastor praised Robert's generosity and the love he had for his family, Danielle's jaw tightened slightly. Under the black veil, her eyes were cold as stone, the eyes of a predator waiting for its prey to grow weak. I remembered the morning before the funeral. Danielle had stood in front of the mirror, carefully drawing a sharp line of eyeliner. Then she turned to me, her voice light and casual. "You should not cry too much, you know. People will think you are weak." That day, I thought she was worried about me. Now I understand. She was only measuring whether I was a threat. When the ceremony ended and everyone slowly left, with only the white flowers trembling in the rain, I bent down and laid my hand on the casket. The wood was icy beneath my trembling fingers. This box was carrying away the man I had loved for half my life. "Rest well, Robert," I whispered. "Do not worry. I promise." My tears fell right where his name was engraved on the lid. In that moment, I wanted to lie down beside him, wanted time to stop so I would not have to face a world where he was no longer there. But I had no idea that just a few hours later, that promise would turn into a vow to win justice for myself. If you have ever felt belittled inside your own family, stay with me, because the next part will show you what happens when a widow everyone thinks is weak starts watching, remembering, and preparing for her first strike back. Are you ready? The black Mercedes glided through the rain-soaked streets of Cleveland. I sat in the back seat, beside the empty space where Robert used to sit. Back then, every time we drove down this stretch of road, he would remind me, "Cynthia, remember to bring a warm scarf. Cleveland is really cold." Today, there was only the dull hum of the air vents and a heavy silence. Danielle was driving, her dark red nails tapping rhythmically on the steering wheel. From time to time, she glanced at me through the rearview mirror, a cold, calculating look. Malik sat beside her, gripping his phone so tightly the knuckles of his hand turned white. No one said a word the entire way. 3 people in one car, but each drifting at a different distance. When the car turned onto the oak-lined road leading to the house in Shaker Heights, the place where Robert and I had lived for more than 20 years, my heart clenched. On the first day we moved in, he carried me over the threshold and laughed loudly. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brewer." Back then, the house was full of the smell of apple pie, jazz music, and laughter. Now it looked more like a battlefield than a home. As soon as the car stopped, I stepped out and froze. My 3 brown leather suitcases were already there by the garage, under the rain. The leather was soaked, stained with patches of water. Just one look, and I knew they had been brought out long ago. On the porch, Danielle stood with her arms crossed, the tight black dress making her look like an ice sculpture. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She shrugged, the corner of her lips lifting. "Now that Dad is gone, everything has to change, you understand, right?" Her tone was light, but every word was sharp as a blade. Malik stood behind her, his eyes fixed on the floor. "My son," I called softly. "What is your wife saying?" He mumbled, "Just temporary, Mom. We are just rearranging things a little." Just temporary. Those 2 words fell into my heart like a sentence being passed. Danielle stepped down from the porch, casually pulled up the garage door, the metal screeching. "You can stay here. The room next to the dog kennel is still empty." She said it sweetly, like she was inviting a guest, then turned and walked straight into the house. The sound of her heels clicked on the wooden floor, blending with the falling rain. I stood still under the porch. Rain and tears blended into one. My hands were shaking so much I nearly dropped the suitcase handles. In my head, Robert's voice echoed again. "Cynthia, when they think you are weak, let them think that. The right silence at the right moment is your strongest weapon." I bent down and dragged the 3 suitcases into the garage. The small room was damp, with stained, moldy walls, thick with the smell of rust and machine oil. A tiny window looked out onto the fence and a few trash cans. There was an old folding bed with a sagging mattress, a low wooden table, an open box of dog food, and a desk lamp with no shade, its weak yellow light flickering. This was not a place for a mother-in-law, and certainly not a place for the woman who had helped build this home with her husband. This was where people put the things they considered no longer valuable. But I did not cry anymore. My tears had run dry after the funeral. Now there was only a freezing void, and something new, smoldering, like a tiny spark that had just caught. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the springs squeaking in protest. I opened the suitcase and took out the pendant Robert had given me, with our wedding photo inside. Him in a black suit, me in a white dress, both of us smiling. I tightened my grip around the chain and smiled very faintly, because right then I understood. I had stepped into the opening moves of a chess game, and I was the only one who knew the rules. If you have ever been pushed to the sidelines in the very house you spent your whole life helping to build, you will understand that feeling. Humiliated, stunned, and at the same time, awakened. And sometimes, the very moment you are forced to the bottom is when you see most clearly every face standing above you. If you are still listening up to this point, remember, the rest of this story is not just about a room next to the dog kennel, but about how a woman who seemed to have been removed from the board quietly turns the entire board around. That night, I could not sleep. The rain tapped steadily on the metal roof. I sat leaning against the tiny window, looking out at the backyard, where the streetlights stretched the shadows of trees, long like mute human figures. I remembered a similar rainy evening, years ago, when Robert and I were sitting by the fireplace. He once said, "If one day I am no longer here, do not let anyone make you ask for permission just to live in your own house." Back then, I laughed and told him he was talking nonsense. Now I sat in a damp garage and realized just how far ahead he had seen. I took out the leather notebook Robert had given me for our 40th wedding anniversary. On the first page was his familiar slanted handwriting. For Cynthia, the strongest woman I know, always write down your story. One day, it will save you. I turned to a blank page and picked up a pen. Day 1, November 15th. No one remembers who I used to be. They think I no longer have any value. I will not remind them. I will let them find out on their own. Robert taught me, the silent observer always sees more than the one who talks too much. Now I understand. I will observe, I will record, I will wait. And when the time comes, I will remind them that dignity is not something they can just take away. I added a few short lines. 5:47 p.m. Danielle comes home. Chanel coat, strong Dior scent, confident posture, in control. 5:52. Malik comes home. Loosened tie, sweat at his collar, avoids direct eye contact, obvious stress. At dinner, Sky and Noah look at me many times, but do not dare come near. 7:35. Danielle on the phone laughing loudly. I clearly hear the words nursing home and cheaper option. It looked like a few dry notes, but to me, each line was a puzzle piece. My hand tired, I put the pen down. My eyes rested on the pendant lying next to the notebook. I held it in my hand and whispered into the darkness, "Robert, I am doing the right thing, am I not?" A gust of wind slipped through the crack of the door, making the page flutter slightly. I smiled faintly. Perhaps that was his way of answering me. Outside, the rain gradually stopped. Only the sound of crickets and leaves brushing against each other remained. The cold still seeped deep into my bones, but this time I did not feel hopeless anymore. From the lowest point in this house, I could see more than they thought. I could stay silent, observe, learn, prepare, without anyone suspecting. And most importantly, I had time to wait for the moment I would rise. I hid the notebook under my pillow and lay down on the squeaky folding bed. The water stain on the ceiling looked like a distorted butterfly. I closed my eyes and murmured one last sentence before sleeping. "Thank you, Robert." I still remember how to get back up, and this time I will stand up the right way. In the darkness, the corner of my lips lifted slightly. It was the smile of someone who knew. The battle had just officially begun, and in this entire house, no one had realized it yet, except me. The first morning in the room next to the dog kennel began at 5:30. I still woke up the way I had for 42 years, with the reflex of a wife who always got up before her husband to make coffee. Only this time, there was no Robert for me to make coffee for anymore. I sat up on the folding bed, the springs creaking as if to remind me, this is not your place. The air was cold, my breath turning into a thin mist. I pulled my sweater tighter, stepped out of the garage, and went up the stairs to the kitchen. On the refrigerator was a pink sticky note in Danielle's sharp, icy handwriting. 6:30. Eggs Benedict for Malik pancakes, for Sky and Noah. Chicken breast salad with no dressing for me. Coffee at 6:45, on time. Remember to feed the dog. D. No please, no thank you, just orders. Part of me wanted to crush the note and walk out of that house, but Robert's voice came back to me. Be patient, Cynthia. The best predator is the one who knows how to wait. I took a deep breath and started cooking. Malik came downstairs with messy hair and eyes swollen from lack of sleep. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, brushing a quick kiss on my cheek out of habit. The smell of whiskey lingered. "Did you sleep well?" "Good enough." His eyes never left his phone. "How do you want your eggs?" "The usual." "Thanks, Mom." Still without looking at me. At exactly 6:45, Danielle came down in a tight workout outfit, the scent of Dior flooding the kitchen. "Good morning," she said, heading straight to the coffee machine without even glancing at me. I set the Eggs Benedict down in front of Malik. Danielle shot it a quick look. Mom remembers he is not supposed to eat too much butter anymore, right? Because this dish... I had barely started when she cut me off. I am on a diet. From now on, my food needs to be low-fat. She pushed the plate aside and served herself salad. Not a single word of thanks. Malik looked at his wife, then bowed his head and ate. The silence made it feel as if all of this were normal. Sky and Noah came down late, walking softly as if afraid to make a sound. "Eat while it is still hot, dears," I said, setting the pancakes down. "Thank you, Grandma," Sky whispered. Noah just gave a quick nod. "Eat quickly. You still have to study," Danielle reminded them, her voice cold. I watched the two children lower their heads, obedient in a way that felt uneasy. When Malik and Danielle left the table, I leaned toward Sky. "This afternoon I will bake cookies. Do you want some?" Her eyes lit up, then dimmed just as fast. Mom said, "I am not allowed to eat sweets. I have to stay in shape." 12 years old, already staying in shape. I gave her a thin smile. I understand. But inside, something cracked with a very soft sound. If you have ever kept cleaning the house, kept cooking, kept caring for everyone, while their eyes slid past you like you were just another chair, then you probably understand how I felt that morning. The question is, when you are treated as invisible, will you truly disappear, or will you quietly find a way to show up again in a way no one could have imagined? When the whole family left, the house sank into silence. I washed the dishes, wiped the counters, vacuumed, cleaned the windows, and went grocery shopping following Danielle's exact list. By 10 in the morning, everything was done, without a single thank you. I looked at my reddened hands, the smell of cleaning agents clinging to my skin. These were the same hands that had once worn a diamond ring, shaking hands with the mayor of Cleveland at charity galas. Now, they were the hands of the help. I let out a soft chuckle. These very hands would one day hold the pen that rewrote my fate. At noon, I sat on the edge of the bed in the garage, eating a cold sandwich with plain water. I opened the leather notebook Robert had given me and wrote, Day 2, November 16th. Danielle controls every dish, strategy of applying pressure through small details. Malik avoids eye contact, sign of guilt and fear. Sky, 12 years old, already obsessed with staying in shape. Noah, unusually quiet. Continue observing. Record all signs of financial irregularities. Just as I finished writing, I heard Danielle's voice drifting down from upstairs. Yes, I already found a nursing home in Akron. Much cheaper than keeping her here. No, Malik does not need to know yet. Men are easy to convince. You just say financial benefits, and that is it. I sat completely still. Nursing home, Akron, cheaper. In Danielle's eyes, I was no longer a mother-in-law, just an expense. I reopened the notebook. Addendum. Danielle plans to send me to a nursing home in Akron because it is cheaper. Intends to hide it from Malik, using financial benefits to persuade him. She is getting impatient. This is a weakness. That afternoon, Sky came over hugging her sketchbook, speaking softly. Grandma, why do you not go back to your own house? Mom is not happy when you stay here. I stroked her hair. I am saving money, dear. Staying here makes it easier for me to take care of you two. But Dad said you have savings. I smiled. Yes, I do. But sometimes adults save money not to spend it right away, but to wait for the right moment. Noah ran over, holding out a test paper. Grandma, I got an A in history. I hugged him. I am so proud of you. When I looked up, I saw Danielle standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes cold as ice. She did not say anything, just watched, then turned away. She watched long enough to send a message. Do not get too close to my children. That night, when everyone was asleep, I went up to the second floor with a bottle of headache pills as my excuse. Robert's old office was still open. The computer password was my date of birth. On the joint account Robert had set up for Malik and his wife, regular withdrawals appeared. Some months a few thousand, some months more than 10,000. The recipient, Serene Holdings, LLC. I checked quickly. No office, no employees, just a P.O. box in Dallas, a shell company. I deleted the browsing history and closed the door as if I had never been there. Back in the garage, I opened the notebook. End of day 2. Addendum. Serene Holdings LLC, shell company. Funds flowing out regularly. Someone is siphoning money from the joint account. Not telling Malik yet. Need more proof. I lay back on the folding bed, looking at the stained wall. The streetlight shone through the small window, drawing a thin streak of light across the rusty surface. They wanted me out of this house. They thought they had pushed me down to the very bottom floor. But they forgot one simple thing. When a woman has lost almost everything, the last thing she will protect with everything she has is her dignity. That night, in that moldy garage, I, Cynthia Brewer, truly began my battle. Not with shouting, but with a notebook, a pen, and a silence that any predator should be afraid of. I waited until Danielle and Malik left the house before picking up my phone. The kitchen still smelled of cold coffee, and the magnolia garden outside the window was strangely peaceful, in stark contrast to the rotten feeling inside this house. I dialed the number. Morton Law Office, this is Lionel Grant speaking. Lionel, it is me, Cynthia Brewer. He was silent for a beat, then said at once, Mrs. Brewer, I have been waiting for your call. There are a few things you need to see as soon as possible. I will be there in an hour. I changed into a dress, tied my hair back neatly, grabbed my handbag, the leather notebook, a pen, and the key to Robert's safe, then drove to Morton and Associates. Lionel met me at the door, in the same familiar gray suit. Cynthia, once again, my condolences. Thank you. But today I am here to talk about the future, not to cry anymore. In the meeting room, he placed a file in front of me. Assets and Trusts of Robert Brewer. Lionel opened the file and spoke slowly. Robert set up a kind of asset trust. The house in Highland Park, the Blue Horizon House Villa in Nag's Head, the stocks, the bonds, the investment accounts, they are all in your name alone. No joint ownership. They belong entirely to you. I stared at the pages, at Robert's familiar signature that hurt to look at. At the bottom of one page was a handwritten line from him. Make sure Cynthia never has to depend on anyone. Never. I gripped the sheet of paper, my hands trembling. Lionel handed me a tissue and said, He arranged everything more than a year ago, after that heart-related hospitalization. He told me, I am not afraid of dying. I am only afraid that one day Cynthia will have to ask someone's permission just to live in her own house. My tears fell, but this time not only because of pain. It felt like being held tightly one more time by someone who had already left this world. Lionel went on, The current total value is about $20 million. The entire portfolio of real estate, securities, retirement accounts, all are locked under your name. I swallowed hard. What about Malik? He has his own separate support, Lionel replied. Robert said, if Malik keeps his head on straight, he will build his own. If not, giving him too much will only ruin him. I laughed through my tears. That was exactly how Robert thought. Lionel looked straight at me. My advice, under no circumstances should you let Danielle know about this. Let everything appear unchanged. When the time comes, I will guide you through the legal procedures to protect your assets and your rights. I nodded. I understand. Thank you, Lionel. And thank you for keeping your promise to Robert. Stepping out of the red brick building, I stood on the steps for a long time. The wind blew against my face. The sunlight lit up the road ahead. I took a deep breath. People say money cannot buy happiness. Maybe. But it can buy something very important, the right to choose how others are allowed to treat you. On the way back, I stopped at a small cafe on the corner and ordered a cappuccino, the kind Robert used to order for me every Sunday morning. While waiting, I opened my phone, created a new email account, set a long password, then set up automatic backup for all the documents Lionel had sent. Every action was a small brick in the new wall of protection forming around me. When I got home, I saw Danielle sitting with her legs crossed on the sofa, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I can transfer the money by the weekend. Just make sure everything is done before next month." "Okay, it is a deal." I walked past, keeping my face calm. She glanced at me, then ended the call. "Oh, you are back. I was just about to ask you for a small favor." She hesitated for a moment, then changed her tone. "Never mind, it can wait." But in Danielle's eyes, I clearly saw the scrutiny. She was weighing how obedient I was, how easily I could be pushed out. In the evening, I cooked a simple meal. Malik looked exhausted. Danielle went on and on about a project in Dallas. "If it goes smoothly, we only need a deposit of $50,000. The profits could double in 6 months." While slicing meat, I asked casually, "Have you checked the legal side thoroughly?" Danielle paused for a beat, then smiled. "Of course, I am not stupid." Malik stayed silent, clearly not understanding anything. I said nothing more, just quietly listened, recording everything in my head. If money was transferred, the statements would give me answers. But not tonight. Tonight, I needed to keep playing the invisible maid. Night fell, and the whole house grew quiet. I lay on the metal bed in the garage, the laptop on my lap. I saved all the documents Lionel had sent into an encrypted folder, backed them up to a separate hard drive, and printed a few hard copies to hide in Robert's small safe. I changed my bank passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and created a separate account for storing sensitive data. With each keystroke, I felt my heartbeat slow down, becoming steadier, not because everything was perfectly safe yet, but because, for the first time in many months, I knew exactly where I stood on the chessboard. Upstairs, Danielle's laughter drifted down, hollow. Malik was silent, as always. I closed the laptop, opened the leather notebook, and wrote the last line of the day. Robert once told me, "When you know the truth, do not be afraid. Use it as light. Today, the light has come back, and this time, it will not shine on me. It will shine straight on those who think they can snuff me out." I set the notebook by my pillow and turned off the light. In the cold, damp darkness of the garage, I smiled very faintly. They thought the new game of chess began when they pushed me down next to the dog kennel. But the truth is, the first move had already been mine, at the exact moment I walked into Lionel Grant's office and learned I was no longer the dependent one. I have always believed that the best liars slip up on the smallest details, like the perfume they choose for an afternoon yoga class. That morning, Danielle carried a white leather bag, wore tight leggings, but her makeup looked like she was about to go on camera. Deep red lipstick, shimmering silver eyeshadow, perfume so strong it drowned out the smell of coffee in the kitchen. I did not ask. I just stood by the sink, watching her reflection in the window glass. "Malik," she said, sweet as honey, "have lunch with your client, okay? I have a yoga class at the studio. I will probably be home late." Malik only mumbled, "Okay," without the slightest suspicion. The garage door closed. The sound of the engine faded away. I looked at the clock, 9:52. She said she was going to yoga, but I knew there was a pair of beige high heels in the trunk, the kind no one wears to a gym. I dried my hands and opened my wallet. Inside was only one thing that mattered, Robert's old phone, which I had set up so it could record video discreetly. By late noon, the Cleveland sun was beating down on the street like needles. I called a cab and told the driver to follow the pearl-white BMW in front of us. The driver, an older man, glanced at me in the rearview mirror and gave a faint smile. People only follow someone when, deep down, they already know what they are going to see. You know that, right? I answered softly, "I know, and I am ready." The BMW turned into a brick-paved district and stopped in front of the Argonaut Hotel, the kind of place people go to close deals, or have affairs, sometimes both. I asked the driver to wait and stepped out of the car. The hot wind carried the smell of asphalt and expensive perfume from the hotel lobby. In less than 5 minutes, Danielle appeared. Beige high heels, a tight jade silk dress, softly curled hair, and a radiant smile I had never once seen at home. She walked straight into the lobby, not even bothering to look around. I followed, keeping a safe distance. In the lobby, the smell of polished wood and white orchids blended together. Near the bar, a man was waiting. I recognized him from the brokerage file photo, DeAndre Collins, young, tall, hair slicked back, the flashy smile of someone who sells dreams for a living. Danielle sat down across from him. They touched hands across the table. DeAndre pushed a thick brown envelope toward her. I stopped behind a large potted plant, pulled out the phone, and rested my thumb on the screen. The camera began recording. They talked for around 15 minutes. I could not hear every word, but their faces said enough. Conspiratorial eyes, knowing smiles, gestures far too intimate for a normal investment consultation. At the end of the meeting, DeAndre took Danielle's hand and bent down to kiss her wrist. She giggled and tilted her head to make it easier for him. I had seen enough. When she stood up to leave, I eased myself into the flow of people, letting my body merge into the anonymous crowd. On the way back, I opened the video and watched it again. Danielle's face was clear, her eyes lit up with smugness, the heavy envelope in her hand, the way she lightly touched DeAndre's lapel, like a promise that did not need words. I saved the video twice, one copy on the phone, one on a private cloud only I knew about. If it were you, what would you do now? Keep that video as a knife to carry on your belt? Confront her immediately? Or stay silent, pretend you know nothing, and see just how far she dares to go? Think about it. You are old, sleeping in the garage, your daughter-in-law treats you like free help, and now you have just recorded her on the verge of betraying both her marriage and her family. Would you choose to explode right now, or quietly wait until everything is enough to become a weapon no one can deny? If you are still watching at this point, try leaving a comment. What would you do with that video? By late afternoon, the sky had darkened, thick black clouds gathering like a storm warning. Malik came home earlier than usual, shirt wrinkled, face tired. Danielle was already in the kitchen, hair in a high bun, wearing workout clothes, a scarf wrapped around her neck as if she had just finished yoga. "You know," she said, voice light as silk, "the yoga class was so crowded today, but I feel so relaxed. I think I should go more often." Malik smiled, believing her immediately. "I am glad you have somewhere to unwind." I walked past, setting a tray on the table. Danielle's eyes slid over me, cold as a blade, but her smile never faltered. "Cynthia, could you make me a cup of herbal tea? I need to detox." "Of course," I replied calmly. "With perfume as strong as today, I think you really do need to detox." She froze for a split second, then forced a laugh. "You always say exactly what is on your mind." I carried the tray away, feeling strangely serene inside. That remark had only been a test slash to see how the prey would react. And in that forced smile, I caught a flicker of fear. That night, the house was unusually quiet. Close to 11, I heard Danielle's high heels clicking down the hallway, stopping in the living room. I held my breath in my little room off the garage. A faint light seeped through the crack under the door, the reflection of a laptop screen on the ceiling. When her footsteps finally moved away and up the stairs, I waited another 10 minutes. Only then did I open the door and step out. Danielle's laptop was still open on the table, unlocked. I sat down, my heart pounding, but my hands steady. On the screen was her inbox. The latest subject line was perfectly clear. Divorce paperwork nearly complete. Just waiting on estate confirmation. I read it again to make sure. Divorce paperwork nearly complete. Just waiting on estate confirmation. My heart did not hurt the way I had imagined. It simply grew colder. Below was the sender's name, Hector Morales, attorney. I opened the email. "Once the asset transfer is complete, You can proceed with the divorce without legal obstacles. As agreed, your husband's share can be moved under the shell company already established in Dallas. This guarantees the mother-in-law cannot interfere. HM. It felt like every sound in the room disappeared. No more anger, no more shock. Only pure, undiluted clarity. Danielle did not just want to humiliate me. She was planning to steal Malik's entire life, and if she succeeded, she would walk away with all the wealth she believed was hers. I pulled out my phone, switched it to silent mode, and took photos of every page of the email. Then I plugged in a small USB drive, the kind Robert used for contracts, and copied all correspondence related to Hector Morales and the Dallas Shell Company. Every click, every slow-moving progress bar on the screen sounded like the heartbeat of this house changing rhythm. When I finished, I removed the USB, cleared the browser history, closed all windows, and shut down the laptop. Danielle's laughter drifted down from upstairs, hollow, sharp, as empty as the clink of crystal glasses at a fake party. I went back to the small room off the garage. The streetlight cast through the window, splitting my shadow in half on the wall. One half was the woman they called a burden. The other half was the woman who now held the evidence of their guilt. I opened my own laptop and created a new folder named Lotus, the name Robert once used in his love letters to me. Cynthia, you are like a lotus flower, rising from the mud, but never stained by it. I stored every file in that folder. The Argonaut Hotel video, the email screenshots, the copied data from Danielle's laptop. One copy I sent to a secret email address only I knew. Another copy I sent to Lionel Grant with no explanation, only a subject line. Keep this for me, just in case. Done. I leaned back in the chair. Rain began to fall on the garage roof, steady and heavy, like the drums at the opening of a show. I turned off the screen and looked up at the stained ceiling, smiling to myself. Robert once told me, "Never hand your fate to someone who cannot keep their word." Back then, I did not listen. Now I have. Danielle thinks she is the hunter, but every hunter has a bigger predator waiting. She thinks she's about to walk out of this cage with a clean, favorable divorce paper in her hand. She has no idea that the moment that brown envelope touched her palm and that email was sent, she had already stepped fully into the trap I quietly laid. I closed the laptop and turned off the light. It rained all night in Cleveland, but I did not feel cold. Because from this moment on, the power game no longer belongs to Danielle, and on the next move, it will be my turn. That morning, I heard the door to the upstairs office creak open. The sound of metal scraping wood made me freeze mid-pour with the coffee pot in my hand. Ever since Robert died, that room had been almost sealed shut. Malik rarely stepped inside. Then my son's voice drifted down the stairs, full of shock. "Mom, can you come up here for a second?" Just from that tone, I knew something was wrong. For months now, Malik had never called me in the voice of a son who had just seen something his mind was not ready to process. I dried my hands, went up the stairs, trying to keep my breathing steady even though my heart was pounding. The office door was wide open. Morning light poured in through the window, washing the dust off the oak desk. Malik stood in the middle of the room, holding a stack of yellowed papers. The desk drawer was pulled out, papers in disarray, but that file lay neatly in the center of the desk, as if someone had deliberately placed it right in his line of sight. I recognized it immediately, Robert's original will. Malik looked up, his eyes confused, hurt, and awakening at the same time. "Mom, this house, it belongs to you." I stepped closer, brushing my fingers over Robert's familiar, slanted handwriting. "Yes," I said slowly. "Your father wanted to protect me. He was afraid that if things fell into the wrong hands, I would be the first one to be hurt." Malik did not answer. He gripped the stack of papers more tightly, as if he could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on his shoulders. Right then, Danielle appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were sharp as a knife, lipstick still on, hair a bit messy from sleep, but her voice was clear and loud. "What is that? What are you holding, Malik?" My son did not have time to hide it. "It is Dad's will." Danielle strode forward quickly and snatched the papers from his hands. Her eyes darted down the lines. Just a few seconds later, her face changed color. "This is impossible. No way. You hid this. You pretended to be poor just to manipulate us." I set my coffee cup down on the desk, straightened my back, and looked directly at her with a gaze she had probably never seen from me since the day she became my daughter-in-law, calm, clear, and no longer yielding. "Manipulate?" I said, my voice cold. "No, Danielle. I stayed silent to see what you would do when you believed you held all the power." She let out a laugh, harsh and sharp. "Oh, perfect. You expect us to trust you while you let me cook, clean, and take care of you like I am the help? I cannot believe this." Malik cut in, his voice shaking. "Danielle, that is enough." "Enough?" She turned on him. "You do not see it, do you? Your mother is playing the victim so you will feel guilty. Now she announces this house is hers. You do not see she is laughing in our faces." I did not argue. Instead, I opened my handbag, took out a thick envelope, and pulled out a stack of photos and several printed pages. I laid them on the desk next to the will. Sunlight hit the glossy surface of the photo. Danielle in a jade silk dress at the Argonaut Hotel, a thick envelope in her hand. That smile she never brought home. Beneath it were the printed emails, each line of text clear and undeniable. "Maybe," I said evenly, "you should look through all of this before you tell one more lie." The room fell completely silent. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard. Danielle picked up the papers, flipping through them. Her eyes widened, her lips trembled slightly. You were spying on me?" "No," I replied. "I just followed the yoga class you mentioned. Turns out people are not practicing breathing there. They are practicing signing divorce papers and asset transfers." Malik went completely still. He picked up one of the emails, read to the last line, and his face went pale. "Divorce paperwork nearly complete, just waiting on estate confirmation." He looked at his wife, his voice strangled. "Danielle, divorce paperwork nearly complete. Waiting on estate confirmation. What is that supposed to mean?" She stepped back, trying to keep her voice steady. "You do not understand. It is just financial planning." "No," I cut in, my tone flat but firm. "That is betrayal. Betrayal of the husband who trusted you, and betrayal of the mother you treated like a disposable item to be shipped off somewhere cheaper." Danielle's face flushed red. "You have no right to say that. You pretended to be poor. You stayed silent. You tested us. What are you trying to prove?" I looked straight into her eyes, then turned to Malik, head bowed, fists clenched. "I am not trying to prove anything. I just let everyone show me who they really are. If you were me, 60 years old, having just buried your husband, thrown down to the garage, then discovering your daughter-in-law is preparing to divorce your son and run off with the estate, what would you do? Stay silent and forgive? Pretend you never saw anything just to keep a fake peace? Or lay every card on the table, no matter who gets hurt, who crashes face first into the truth? If you are still watching at this point, leave a comment. Would you choose to protect harmony or to protect the truth? Malik's hands were shaking. He laid the papers back on the desk, his voice hoarse. "I really have been so stupid." "No," I shook my head. "You have just been silent for too long. And sometimes, Malik, it is that silence that makes people feel they are allowed to do anything they want to you." He looked up, eyes wet. "Mom, I am sorry." "Do not rush to apologize," I said softly. "Just look at how you kept quiet, and ask yourself why people felt so comfortable pushing your mother down into the garage." Danielle's breathing grew shallow, her steps edging back toward the wall like an animal cornered. This old woman is no better than anyone else. She just knows how to wait for the right time to throw the knife. I smiled faintly. No, Danielle, I am not throwing knives. I am simply no longer letting people step on me. I pulled open the desk drawer and placed a small key on the wooden surface, the key to Robert's safe. In there, I said slowly, are all the asset documents, the accounts, the deed to the Nag's Head Villa, and the originals of everything you are holding. If I want, with a single phone call, it will all be on my lawyer's desk and Lionel's. Danielle froze, then let out a bitter laugh. You think you have won, do you? I straightened up and adjusted my collar. The morning light fell across my face, illuminating features that no longer bent under shame. No, Danielle, I do not think I have won. I have simply taken back the place I should never have had to give up. Malik was the one who left the room first. He walked out without a word, his shoulders heavy. The door closed behind him, leaving only me and Danielle. She leaned against the wall, shoulders trembling slightly, her voice dropping low. You know, I used to think you were weak. Turns out you were just waiting for the right moment to twist the blade. I answered calmly, No, Danielle, I am not twisting any blade. I am just done putting my own neck out for someone else to hold a knife to it. She swallowed hard, turned away, and rushed out. The door slammed, making the window glass rattle. I stayed seated in Robert's old chair. My hand rested on the wooden surface, feeling every scratch, every trace of the years. For so many years, I had sat beside my husband at this desk, planning our future. Today, I sat there alone, but for the first time, I was not in the position of the guest in my own house. That afternoon, I organized the desk. In the drawer, Robert's old fountain pen was still there. I picked it up, wiped it clean, and placed it in a box as if tucking away a promise. On the shelf was a family photo, me, Robert, Malik, the 2 children, and Danielle. I took the frame down, slid out the glass, and pulled out the picture. Without saying a word, I took a pair of scissors and cut the photo into 2 halves. The right side, where Danielle stood, I folded, slipped into an envelope, and locked in a cabinet. I did not need to hate her. Hatred is a shackle. I only needed to remember, because memory, sometimes, is the fairest evidence there is. As the afternoon sun stretched a long golden bar across the wooden floor, I knew that from this moment on, I had officially returned to my rightful place, the owner of this house and the owner of my own life, and this time no one is ever pushing me down to the lowest floor again. The next afternoon, the sky over Cleveland was unusually clear. I was rereading the reports Lionel had sent when the doorbell rang, long and decisive. From behind the curtain, I saw Danielle and DeAndre Collins in a gray suit, hair slicked back. I opened the door. DeAndre smiled smoothly. "Mrs. Brewer, we are here to have a civilized conversation." They sat down on the sofa, the leather briefcase placed on the table. I did not beat around the bush. "You both seem quite busy. Get to the point." Danielle tried to soften her voice. "I do not want to turn this into a war. If you really care about Sky and Noah, you should consider a settlement." DeAndre opened the briefcase and laid a white envelope on the table. "You have considerable assets. We are only asking for a small portion, $3 million. Let us call it support to stabilize the children's future." I curled my lip. $3 million to stabilize. Danielle cut in, eyes flashing. "You have $20 million Robert left you, not to mention stocks and real estate. You are not young anymore. What are you keeping it all for?" I asked flatly. "And if I say no?" DeAndre gave a polite smile, his eyes cold. "Then we will go the legal route. At your age, just a few light psychological evaluations, and the court can easily declare you incompetent. In that case, control of the assets would pass to a legal guardian, your son, or someone more suitable." Danielle added, Can you picture Sky and Noah having to go to court? Children are very honest, Cynthia. All they have to say is that you forget things, mix things up, skip meals, and that is enough. If you were sitting in your own living room, listening to your daughter-in-law and her lawyer, both asking for money and threatening to have you labeled mentally incompetent, would you sign and let it go? Or would you choose to flip the board, knowing that from that moment on, there would be no way back? I chose the second option. I stood up, went to the wooden cabinet by the window, took out a black file folder, and set it on the table. At first, I truly wanted to keep everything peaceful, I said evenly, but some people do not know when to stop. On the cover was a label, Collins DeAndre, personal debt file. DeAndre frowned. What is that? I opened the file. Account statements, loan documents, transaction histories, betting slips. I know you owe casinos in Dallas $200,000 and that you once forged a partner's signature in a deal in Austin. I have enough paperwork. If I send this to the Bar Association, you know what will happen. His face went pale. Are you threatening me? I am merely reminding you. With fraud and gambling on your public court record, even applying to be a parking lot security guard, people would have to think twice. I turned to Danielle. As for you, if I send this video to the court, you will not only lose your reputation, you might lose custody of Sky and Noah as well. I opened my laptop. The Argonaut Hotel lobby appeared on the screen. Danielle in a jade silk dress, thick envelope in hand, letting DeAndre kiss her wrist before bending over to sign the papers. Danielle's face went blank. No, you cannot. I can, I replied, and I will. If you sit here 1 minute longer trying to threaten me. The room went dead silent. Danielle burst into tears. I just want to take care of my children. I looked straight at her. You left Sky alone 2 nights in a row to go to that hotel with him. I have all the backyard camera footage. You showed me yourself what your priorities are, and it is not your children. DeAndre's voice turned rough. What do you want from us? Nothing at all, I said shortly. I just need both of you out of my house. I opened the door. Noon sunlight flooded in. Get out of my house, right now. DeAndre stood up first and walked past me without daring to look up. Danielle slowly rose, eyes red and swollen. At the threshold, she turned back. You are going to regret throwing the children's mother out of here. I answered calmly. No, Danielle. I am simply doing what should have been done long ago, protecting what is mine before it is torn to pieces. The door closed, the sharp click echoing like the final period at the end of a long nightmare. I stood still in the living room. Sunlight fell across the rug, dust motes glittering in the air. My shoulders felt lighter, as if an invisible yoke had finally been lifted from my neck. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and took it out to the porch. The wind rustled through the magnolia trees, and somewhere in the backyard I could hear Sky and Noah's laughter. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the cup seep into my hands, letting the sun touch my face. When I opened them again, I smiled. Not the smile of victory, but the smile of someone who has finally stepped out of the victim's role, returned to her rightful place, the one who guards the door, the one who protects, the one who decides who is allowed into her life and who is required to leave it. This battle is over, and this time I did not just keep the house. I kept myself. 3 days after the final confrontation, I received a call from Lionel Grant. His voice was low but steady, the voice of a man far too familiar with storms. Cynthia, everything is ready, he said. I have just filed for a protective order and a restraining order with the county court. Danielle and DeAndre Collins will not be allowed to come near you or any member of your family for 2 years. If they violate it, the police will intervene immediately. I was sitting on the porch, looking out at the magnolia garden that had just been neatly trimmed. The morning sunlight was soft, the white blossoms trembling gently in the breeze. A strange sense of peace washed over me. as if the world had finally agreed to stop long enough for me to catch my breath. "Thank you, Lionel," I said. "I do not want to see them again. Ever." He chuckled softly. "You will not have to. The law can be slow, but once it starts moving, it is very powerful." That afternoon, Malik went to the law office and signed the official divorce papers. When he came home, he sat down at the dining table, his eyes tired but clearer than they had been in months. "It is done, Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "I submitted all the evidence, the emails, the videos, the recordings of the threats. The lawyer says this case will be processed quickly. Danielle has nowhere left to run." I nodded, not asking for details. He was silent for a long time before finally speaking again. "You know, the hardest part is not the divorce. It is facing the truth that I let you suffer alone for such a long time." I looked at my son, a 38-year-old man, hair already flecked with gray at the temples, his shoulders weighed down by guilt more than by age. I placed my hand over his. "You have faced it now, Malik. That is the first step to healing. Do not keep punishing yourself. People grow up by daring to say, 'I am sorry,' and then living in a way that is worthy of those words." He bowed his head and squeezed my hand tightly, without saying anything more. In that moment, a thought crossed my mind. If you were me, a mother who had been pushed down to the garage, treated like a burden, and then one day your son came back and said, "I am sorry," what would you do? Hold him in your arms as if nothing had ever happened? Keep your distance to protect yourself? Or choose a path in between, forgive, but never forget the lesson? If you are still listening up to this point, leave me a line in the comments. Do you believe a child can truly change? Or are there cracks that once broken can never be healed? 3 months later. February in Cleveland was bitterly cold. Snow covered Shaker Heights like a thick blanket. But inside the house, the air was warmer than in any winter I had ever lived through. Sky and Noah now lived with Malik full-time. Danielle had moved to Dallas under a remote supervision arrangement ordered by the court. On paper, the schedule said the kids could video call their mother every week, but they rarely wanted to. One Saturday afternoon, Sky sat pressed up against me on the sofa, her head resting on my shoulder. "Grandma," she said softly, "I am so happy you are still here." I stroked her hair and smiled. "So am I, sweetheart." Noah ran over, clutching a crumpled sheet of paper. "Look, Grandma, I drew you, Dad, and us at the beach." In the drawing, there were 4 figures standing by the ocean, a yellow sun, blue waves, and a small house in the background. Simple, childish, but my heart felt like it was melting. "It is beautiful, honey," I whispered, hugging Noah tight. "And I promise, one day, we really will go." At the beginning of March, I knew the time had come. I called Malik into Robert's office, the room I had repainted, hung a few new photos in, and placed a potted plant in the corner. The space was the same, but the energy was different. "Son," I said, laying a thick envelope on the desk, "these are the transfer papers for the Cleveland house." Malik froze. "Mom, no. This is your house. You have to keep it." I shook my head, my voice gentle but firm. "No, Malik. Your father wanted you to learn how to stand on your own feet. Now you have done that. The rest of the lesson is this. You must know how to protect your own roof. I no longer need this house to feel safe." He was silent for a long time, then stood up and hugged me tightly. "I promise, I will never let you and Dad down again." The next day, I packed my luggage. Not much. A few changes of clothes, the leather notebook, the pendant Robert gave me, and a few old books. Everything else I left behind for Malik, Sky, and Noah. He drove me to Hopkins Airport. On the way, he kept glancing over at me. "Are you sure, Mom? The Outer Banks are so far. You will be there alone. Will you really be okay?" I smiled and looked straight ahead. "I have lived for other people for more than 60 years, Malik. Now I need a few years to learn how to live for myself. It is time." Sky and Noah sat in the back seat, clutching their backpacks. When I hugged each of them goodbye, they both burst into tears. "Grandma, you have to video call us every week," Sky sobbed. I nodded. "I promise. And this summer, if your dad can arrange it, I want to see you both running on the sand at Nag's Head." Noah grabbed my hand. "Promise you are not leaving us, right?" I knelt down, placed both hands on his shoulders, and looked straight into those big round eyes. "I will never leave you. I am only going to find myself again, and when I come back, I will be much stronger than I am now. That is my promise." I stood up and walked toward the security gate. This time, I was not the woman being pushed down to the garage, holding 3 rain-soaked suitcases. I was Cynthia Brewer, a 60-year-old woman who had opened the door herself, stepped out of humiliation, and walked into a new life. No more fear, no more asking for permission, only freedom, and the peace I had fought with my own hands to reclaim. The flight to the Outer Banks, North Carolina took almost 3 hours, but to me, it felt as long as an entire lifetime. From the airplane window, the blue ocean stretched out endlessly. In my head, I heard Robert's words again. "If there is one place in the world where time stops for me, it is Blue Horizon." The taxi stopped on a road running along the shoreline. Blue Horizon House emerged between the trees, white walls, red-tiled roof, windows flung wide open toward the ocean. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of salt mixed with the scent of old wood rushed toward me. Light poured through the windows, washing over the things Robert had chosen himself: the oil painting, the rocking chair, the wedding photo of us laughing in the sun. I stood in the middle of the living room and whispered, "I am home, Robert." On my first afternoon in Nag's Head, I walked along the beach, fine sand under my feet, turquoise water lapping at my ankles. I took off my sandals and let the waves wash away the dust of the past months. People say the sea can cleanse wounds. I do not know if that is true. I only know that, for the first time in a long while, I took a deep breath without feeling my chest weighed down. The next day, I hired a local couple, Paula Santiago and her husband, Mateo, to help care for the house. Paula was petite, with gentle eyes. Mateo was quiet, solid. After walking one round of the house, Paula smiled. "This house has a soul, Senora. It feels like it has been waiting for someone to come back." I replied, "Maybe it has been waiting for me." From that day on, Blue Horizon was no longer empty. Every morning, Paula opened the doors to let the sunlight flood in, and Mateo trimmed the garden. The sound of the waves, the smell of coffee, and the snip of pruning shears blended into a new rhythm of life. I reset my own rhythm as well. At 6 in the morning, I put on Robert's old straw hat and walked along the beach. Every footprint I left in the sand was erased immediately by the waves, a gentle reminder that the past cannot be held on to. Only the present is what we truly touch. I often sat on a rock, watching the sun rise above the horizon. Many times, in the sound of the waves, it felt like someone was whispering, "You are okay now, Cynthia. At last, you are okay." If it were you, after losing nearly everything and then suddenly being placed in a place with nothing but sunlight, waves, and silence, what would you do with that freedom? Pretend that there had never been a storm, or learn to stand taller thanks to the very scars you carry? My answer lies in what I did next. At noon, I went to the local hospital, a place that was always short of English speakers to help tourists when they had health problems. I registered as a volunteer. The work was not heavy, but it gave me the feeling of being useful again, helping an elderly lady from Minnesota read her prescription, reassuring a young man who had broken his leg while diving, sitting and listening to a stranger talk about a trip cut short. A young nurse smiled at me. "Senora Brewer, you bring a feeling of peace. Everyone who talks to you seems less worried afterward." I replied, Maybe because I have gone through many storms. People who understand storms usually speak more gently. In the evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset fall over the sea. The sky shifted from gold to pink to purple. The distant boat lights glittered like stars drifting across the water. That was also the time when Malik usually called on video. His face still showed some tiredness, but no longer the frantic look of someone trapped between guilt and fear. Sky and Noah jostled behind him, competing to tell me, "Grandma, I got an A in history." "Grandma, I got the lead role in the school play." I listened, laughing until my eyes stung. Malik looked at me and said slowly, "I can see you are much happier than before." I nodded. Maybe because I am not afraid anymore. Only when fear disappears can we really live. From the Brewer Fund, I began sending tuition support to a few children in town, asking Paula to choose families that were truly struggling. I did not want to become the reclusive millionaire lady by the sea. I only wanted to be someone who gave in the right places. Every time I signed a transfer order, I remembered Robert's words, "Money is only a tool, Cynthia. The real value is in how you use it." Malik slowly changed as well. He agreed to go to therapy regularly. At first he went reluctantly. Later, he was the one who took the initiative to tell me what he had learned, how to face his guilt, how to talk to his children, how not to repeat what once hurt him. One evening, near the end of our call, he hesitated. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled. "I never planned to give up on you, Malik. Just remember one thing for me. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is choosing not to let the past drive your life anymore." He nodded. In that moment, my son's smile looked exactly like it did years ago, when he was a little boy, clinging tightly to my hand every time we walked through an unfamiliar street. By my 3rd month at Blue Horizon, I hosted a small dinner. Paula cooked fish Yucatan style, and Mateo opened a bottle of red wine Robert had left behind. I put on some soft music and opened all the doors so the sea breeze could rush in, the sound of the waves, the smell of grilled fish, the scent of wine, and the sound of laughter blended into the one thing I had been missing for far too long, the feeling of home. I raised my glass. Thank you both for being here and helping this house come back to life. Paula placed a hand over her heart and shook her head. "Oh no, Señora. It is you who has made this place warm again." That night, after they left, I walked one more circle around the house. White walls, high ceiling, moonlight spilling onto the wooden floor. The house was quiet, with only the sound of the waves outside, steady as breathing. I stepped out onto the balcony and looked out at the sea. Above there were stars. Below, the boat lights flickered. I leaned against the railing, inhaling the salty air, and felt a feeling that was hard to name, peace mixed with gratitude. Before going to bed, I did not lock the door. Not because I was careless, but because I no longer needed to protect myself that way. There was no longer any shadow lurking, no more threats hiding in the walls. I lay down on the wide bed, pulled the blanket up, and left the window slightly open for the sea breeze to flow in. The waves crashed steadily, slowly, firmly, like Robert's heartbeat somewhere in the dark. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I am still a mother, a grandmother, and now a free woman. At last, I am free." That night, for the first time in many years, I slept deeply, without dreaming that I was being pushed down to the lowest floor of my own house, and most importantly, I slept without locking the door, not because the world had suddenly become better, but because, for the first time, I knew I had forgiven everyone, and forgiven myself. Mornings at Blue Horizon always begin with the sound of waves, steady and calm, like the heartbeat of a place that has learned how to forgive. I make tea, bring it out to the porch, and sit watching the sun crawl up from the sea. The first golden light touches the wedding photo of Robert and me on the small wooden table. One morning, Sky sat next to me. She stayed quiet for a long time and then asked softly, "Grandma, are you still angry with my mom?" I looked out at the ocean. "No, sweetheart. I am not angry anymore, but I have not forgotten." Not forgetting. What does that mean? It means you remember, so you do not lose your way again. Some wounds, all you need to do is stop touching them. Sky nodded and rested her head on my shoulder. The wind carried the smell of salt and faint laughter from somewhere far away. A few weeks later, Malik brought the kids to visit. He looked calmer, as if he had stopped blaming himself so much. At lunch, I placed an envelope on the table. "Malik, these are the transfer papers for the house in Cleveland. From now on, the house is yours, along with a fund to keep it until Sky and Noah are grown." He froze. "No, Mom. That is your house." I shook my head. "Your father wanted you to stand on your own. Now you have done that. I do not need that house anymore to feel safe." He was silent, then hugged me tightly. "I promise I will not let you and Dad down ever again." In the afternoon, Sky and Noah came into the kitchen with me. I taught Sky how to write a journal. You do not have to write beautifully, you just have to write truthfully. There are things we cannot say out loud, but once we write them down, they feel lighter. Her first line was, "Today Grandma taught me to write about my feelings instead of being afraid of them." Noah stood by the stove and asked, "Grandma, why is cooking so important?" "Because it is the simplest way to show love. The one who cooks has to wait, has to pay attention, has to listen." He nodded seriously and then burned the first pancake. I laughed, he blushed, and in the end, all three of us burst out laughing in a kitchen that used to be filled only with sighs. Later that afternoon, Sky taught me how to use TikTok. The two of them said, "Grandma, you are trendier than our mom." I laughed until my eyes stung. One night, when the house was quiet, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Cynthia, I am sorry for everything. Danielle." I stared at the screen for a long time, then deleted the message. Not because I was still angry, but because I did not need that apology anymore. Some apologies arrive when the person listening no longer needs them to go on living. That night, I sat in Robert's office. The wooden desk still had the same old scratches. I picked up a pen and opened a blank sheet of paper. "My beloved Robert, I have kept the most important thing you left me, my dignity. Malik has learned how to love again. Sky and Noah are growing up in the light, no longer in fear. As for me, I am no longer angry with anyone, not even myself. Blue Horizon is no longer a place to run away to, but a place where I get to live fully. Thank you for believing I was strong enough to walk this road to the end." I folded the letter and placed it next to our wedding photo. That night, I opened the window. Waves crashed offshore, and the moon cast a silver trail over the water. Inside, I no longer felt hollow, only the quiet of someone who has gone through storms without losing her heart. Paula once said, "This house has a soul." I think maybe I am the one who was brought back to life here. The next morning, Nag's Head sunlight poured into the room, shining on Robert's smile in the photograph. I gently touched the glass and stepped out onto the porch. The sea was still blue, the wind still carried the scent of salt and the jasmine Paula had put in a vase. Everything at Blue Horizon was the same, only I was different. No longer the trembling woman shoved down next to the dog kennel, but the woman who had stood up and reclaimed the right to live with dignity. That noon, Malik called on video. Sky and Noah squeezed into the frame. "Grandma, we planted tomatoes! They are almost as tall as we are!" I laughed. "That is wonderful. Everything beautiful begins with a seed planted in the right place." Malik looked at me and said quietly, "I think you have planted the most precious thing, self-respect and love." I replied, "No, your father was the one who planted them. I am just tending the soil." In the afternoon, I walked along the beach, watching the waves slowly erase my footprints. Old wounds are like that too, fading over time, but leaving the lesson behind. I stopped by my favorite rock and whispered, "Robert, do you see? I did it." From a distance, Paula's voice called, "Senora Cynthia, dinner is ready." I turned back, smiling, feeling as if I had just closed a long book, not with a scream, but with a peaceful breath. When night fell, I wrote the final lines in my journal. I lost things I thought I could never get back: trust, respect, family. But in that loss, I found myself again. Some victories are not loud. They are simply the moment an ordinary woman learns how to smile after the storm. I turned off the light and left the window slightly open for the sea breeze to rush in. I knew that the next morning I would once again make tea, step out onto the porch, and smile at the sunrise, as a promise that I would keep living, keep loving, and tell the rest of my life story in peace. If you are hearing these words from anywhere in the world, tell me, where are you listening from? My life and yours may be different, but the feeling of being hurt and the longing to be loved the right way are more alike than we think. Leave a comment and tell me, how have you ever healed a wound with kindness? And if you believe, like I do, that kindness is still the greatest strength we have, please hit like, subscribe, and stay for the stories to come. Thank you for staying until the very end. As long as there is someone out there listening to this journey, I know every wound is worth healing.